Hello and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9. I'm Paul Kretschmann. The subject of today and tomorrow is Israel's hostages and the hostility they face in other parts of the world. My guest is Jonathan Feldstein, the founder of the Genesis 123 Foundation. We'll discuss what citizens are going through right now, both in Israel and elsewhere, and what he's trying to do to improve prospects for the future.
Between Jews and Christians with Israel, in ways that are new, unique, and meaningful. And we've launched a number of initiatives over the years to fill the gap where people are not connecting. We have the first Christian-oriented program for the Jerusalem Marathon called Run for Zion. We have I'm the Only Orthodox Jew with a weekly radio podcast on the Charisma Podcast Network called Inspiration from Zion, which is quite amazing. We've done all kinds of global prayer events. And today, because of many other things, but because of the war today, actually literally today, we launched a petition drive in order to help free the hostages, 240 human beings who have been kidnapped and taken hostage in Gaza. And in addition to that, for the last month, we've been running the Israel Emergency Campaign, which is to provide humanitarian relief and help here in Israel among a very wide range of the population, because as much as we're all inspired and as much as we're all unified, we're also all grieving, we're also all angry, and there's a lot of fear because we know that we're not even close to finishing the battle, and we will have a lot of losses still on top of compounding the losses that we've already had.
In how many different ways is the situation at present so much different than situations Israel has faced in the past, and how much of it is actually very similar to what people have faced before, but perhaps they are from a perspective of a person who's younger?
Yeah. The only similarity that I can come up with is, I'll say two. That's a very good question. First of all, it was a surprise attack on October 7th, which followed the 50th anniversary of the surprise attack on October 6th, which began the Yom Kippur War. But that was over by now. That war ended by now, 50 years ago. We're still in this for a while. It's also similar because it's a war of annihilation, and that's the war that began before Israel was even founded. The destruction, the obliteration, the extermination of Jews and the Jewish presence here in the land and now the state of Israel. And that's real critical because we're seeing exactly the same thing. People who were massacred on October 7th weren't massacred because they were in uniform. They were massacred because they were Jews or even non-Jews here in the state of Israel. And they continued to cry from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is a chant for genocide. And that's what they wanted from the beginning, and that's what they still want.
Can you identify in your own mind the genesis of the evil that this whole thing represents? The reason why I ask that is because in the past, not to get unduly political here, but in the past, leaders like Harry Truman, who was a member of the Democratic Party, was among the first, if not the first, head of state to recognize the state of Israel as a sovereign entity. And now in the 21st century, there are many members of the Democratic Party who are among those who are shouting the loudest for what they perceive as the genocide of Palestinian Muslims, not taking into account that it was people who are Muslim who launched this attack on Israel in the first place. So it's almost like calling the victim guilty for being a victim.
That's 100% correct. And look, we had a long biblical conversation. The Genesis, I believe, is in Genesis. Goes back to Ishmael and those who have hijacked what Ishmael is or who he was, and the jealousy between brothers and God promising he was going to make a great nation of both brothers. But the covenant is between God and the Jewish people through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not Ishmael and whoever his descendants were. That's the beginning. But in our modern day, it's all Islam. And that the head of the snake is Iran. There's no question about that. That's our policy toward Iran, mostly for the last 40 plus years, when I say our, I'm still speaking as an American, even though I'm also an Israeli citizen, has been misguided. We need to defeat the mullahs. We need to let the Iranian people take back their country for their well-being and for the well-being of the rest of the world. And the genesis is an Islam that despises Judaism and despises Christianity. Maybe there's a jealousy because we're the only people who actually worship and have a relationship with the creator of the universe. But it's a horrible situation that's biblical and showing its gross ugliness in our modern day.
Is it unjustified in your view for the world to expect Israel to utilize stand-downs or humanitarian pauses, as Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States, has called for? If you put Israel up against its opponent and can say that one nation is sovereign and chooses to be as appropriate in its behavior on the one hand, while recognizing that what Hamas has done and is doing is far from appropriate because they're terrorists. Can you draw a parallel between those who are terrorists and those who act appropriate because they're a sovereign nation and understand what the rules of war are and what appropriate behavior by nations is?
No, there's no parallel. It is completely not only unjustified; it's obscene. It's obscene, and Blinken, who saw the horrific pictures, and President Biden, who saw the horrific pictures, and John Kirby, who openly wept on live TV after seeing the images. They have to know that this is not Islam. This is not an enemy that you can negotiate with. The enemy that has to be defeated. And to call for a pause, which is it's like calling a pause is the new ceasefire. It's pasteurized the whole notion, but it's absurd. It's saying that Jewish lives don't matter. There's 1,400 people who were massacred here on the 14th and on the 7th of October, and everyone who's lost their lives since and before. It doesn't matter. We have to be given the leeway to defeat this evil, and it's an evil that's going to. I was going to say it's not going to come around and bite the West in the butt. It's there. It's doing that, and it's coming from a perspective of this moral equivalence that everything is gray area. No, there's black and white. There's good and evil. And I don't know if in my lifetime, other than September 11th, that I've ever seen such vivid good and evil. And anyone who's on the right side needs to be on the right side.
So when the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations responded with the rebuke that he did to the Secretary General of the United Nations, in your view then, and in the view of people you know, it was entirely appropriate what the ambassador said. And if I might characterize it, the thing that Mr. Guterres said was not appropriate under the circumstances as we see them.
No, people. It was gross what the Secretary General of the United Nations would say. One would hope that a mature adult getting into the position of becoming the Secretary General of one of the largest world bodies that's supposed to be about bringing peace and coexistence and the nations living together would have a sense that there's no moral justification for anything that Hamas does or stands by, full stop.
I'll pick up my conversation with Jonathan Felstein, the founder of the Genesis 123 Foundation, on tomorrow's WIHS Journal. Jonathan Felstein is my guest for today and tomorrow. For further information, call us at 860-346-1049. That's 860-346-1049. Or send email to office@wihsradio.org. office@wihsradio.org. The opinions expressed are those of the participants, not necessarily those of the staff or management of this station. I'm Paul Kretzmer on the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9 WIHS.